Ever wondered what a day in a medieval village actually sounded like? Can you imagine living without the constant hum of electronics, traffic noise, or smartphone notifications? Number 10. The rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer. From sunrise to sunset, the distinctive metallic ping of the blacksmith's hammer rang through virtually every medieval village. This wasn't just background noise, it was the heartbeat of medieval industry. Blacksmiths didn't simply make weapons, they were responsible for crafting and repairing nearly every metal object needed for daily life. Horseshoes, nails, hinges, cooking pots, agricultural tools, and door fittings all emerged from the village forge. The sound had a distinctive rhythm to it, a heavy strike followed by several lighter taps as the blacksmith shaped hot metal against the anvil. Many blacksmiths developed their own unique cadence, almost like a signature, which villagers could recognize from a distance. "That's Thomas working on a plowshare," they might say, identifying both the craftsman and his project simply by the pattern of strikes. Medieval villages considered themselves fortunate to have a skilled blacksmith among them. The forge served as more than just a workshop. It became a social center where men would gather, particularly in winter, drawn by the warmth of the fire and the opportunity to exchange news and stories while waiting for repairs. The blacksmith typically positioned his forge at the edge of the village due to fire concerns, but the distinctive sounds carried easily across the small settlement. Children were particularly fascinated by the forge, often watching from a safe distance as the blacksmith transformed ordinary metal into practical tools through fire, strength, and skill. The smell of hot metal, the shower of sparks, and the consistent rhythm of hammer strikes created a multisensory experience that defined the medieval workday. Number 9. The dawn chorus of roosters and livestock. Before mechanical alarms existed, medieval villages woke to nature's timekeeper, the rooster. These birds began their announcements well before dawn, with their calls carrying across thatched rooftops as the first hint that night was ending. Unlike our modern experience of occasionally hearing a distant rooster, medieval villages hosted dozens or even hundreds of these birds, creating a cascading chorus as one rooster's call triggered responses from others. This wasn't a single cock-a-doodle-doo, but an ongoing conversation that might last for hours, with different roosters maintaining different schedules. Some particularly enthusiastic birds began their calls around 2:30 a.m., hours before any actual light appeared in the sky. For light sleepers, this could prove maddening, but most villagers became so accustomed to the sound that they incorporated it into their sleep cycles, briefly waking to note the roosters had begun before drifting back to sleep until needed. As dawn properly arrived, the entire village's animal population joined the morning concert. Cows lowed for milking, pigs squealed in anticipation of feeding, sheep bleated, goats called, and dogs barked in response to the general excitement. For modern ears accustomed to urban quiet, the sheer volume of animal sounds might seem overwhelming, but for medieval people, these familiar calls provided comfort and structure. The absence of expected animal sounds might even cause alarm, potentially indicating predators or illness among the livestock. This morning crescendo of animal sounds wasn't limited to farms. Even modest village households typically kept chickens, perhaps a pig, and maybe a goat or cow if space and resources permitted. Animals lived in close proximity to humans, often in attached structures or yards immediately beside living quarters. These weren't distant farm sounds, but immediate, intimate morning conversations happening just beyond the bedroom wall. Number 8. The steady rhythm of the mill wheel. Perhaps no sound better represented the medieval economy than the constant creaking, splashing rotation of the mill wheel. Water mills represented significant technological investments for medieval communities, and their distinctive sounds signified prosperity and activity. The combination of flowing water, turning wooden mechanisms, and grinding stones created a complex soundscape that could be heard throughout nearby areas. Mills weren't solely for grinding grain, though that remained their primary purpose. By the later medieval period, water power drove hammers for fulling cloth, operated bellows for forges, powered saw blades, and even assisted with leather tanning operations. Each type of mill produced its own distinctive soundscape. The grain mill with its distinctive grinding stone noise, the fulling mill with rhythmic pounding, the sawmill with its cutting screech. For peasants bringing grain to be ground, the mill sounds represented both hope and obligation. The turning wheel meant their grain would be processed into usable flour, but it also signified the miller's fee, typically around 1/16 of the grain brought for grinding, a substantial cost for subsistence farmers. Some mills were owned by local lords who required their tenants to use only the manorial mill, making the sound a reminder of feudal obligations. Mills typically operated from dawn until dusk, weather permitting. During harvest season, they might run continuously, with millers working through the night by candlelight to process the sudden abundance of grain. During drought months, the slowing or stopping of the mill wheel created immediate anxiety throughout a village, as diminished water flow threatened food processing capabilities. The steady splash and creak of a well-functioning mill provided psychological reassurance that the community's food supply remained secure. Number 7. The bells that structured medieval time. If any single sound defined medieval daily life, it was the ringing of bells. Before mechanical clocks became widespread, bells served as the community's timekeeper, calendar, and emergency broadcast system. The church bell tower stood at the literal and figurative center of the medieval village, its sounds reaching every corner of the settlement. The bells rang to mark canonical hours: matins before dawn, prime at sunrise, terce at mid-morning, sext at noon, none at mid-afternoon, vespers at sunset, and compline before bed. While only clergy and the devout might observe every prayer time, these regular sound marks helped villagers organize their days. Meet me after vespers bells or work until none provided commonly understood time references. Beyond marking hours, bells announced deaths with distinctive tolling patterns indicating the gender and status of the deceased, warned of approaching danger, celebrated weddings, proclaimed festivals, and called villagers to community gatherings. Different occasions required different ringing patterns, and villagers could interpret these auditory codes as clearly as we read traffic signals today. Special occasions demanded special ringing techniques. On major feast days, bell ringers might perform complex patterns lasting hours, filling the air with celebratory sounds. For royal visits or extraordinary events, all church bells in a region might ring simultaneously, creating literal harmony across miles of countryside. Professional bell ringers developed remarkable skills, manipulating ropes to create precisely timed cascades of sound. During times of mourning or religious observance like Good Friday, the bells fell silent, a profound absence that medieval people found deeply unsettling. The bells provided such constant orientation that their silence created a sense of disorientation, marking these special times as outside normal experience. When bells rang at unexpected times, villagers knew to drop everything and gather quickly. Such urgent ringing typically signaled fire, approaching troops, or other emergencies requiring immediate community response. Number 6. The human voice at market day. Once weekly in most villages, the relatively quiet rhythm of agricultural life transformed with market day. The human voice in all its variety dominated this special day's soundscape. Merchants and customers haggling over prices, friends greeting one another, traveling performers seeking audiences, announcements of new regulations, gossip exchanges, and children playing created a vibrating tapestry of human sound unlike any other medieval experience. Market day provided crucial social connections in a world without telecommunications. People traveled from outlying farms and neighboring villages, bringing not just goods but news, stories, and information. The resulting conversations ranged from matter-of-fact price negotiations to elaborate storytelling sessions. Volume levels typically reached remarkable heights as vendors competed to attract attention, calling out their wares in distinctive sing-song patterns that carried across the marketplace. For medieval children, market day sounds offered education and entertainment. Traveling merchants brought unfamiliar accents and occasionally foreign languages. Storytellers and musicians performed for coins or meals, bringing tales from distant places. Town criers made official announcements, their trained voices cutting through the general commotion with practiced clarity. Jugglers, acrobats, and other entertainers used verbal patter to gather crowds. The soundscape varied throughout the day. Morning brought the establishment sounds of merchants setting up stalls and greeting early customers. Midday reached peak volume as maximum crowds filled the marketplace, creating a conversational roar that contemporary visitors often found overwhelming. As evening approached, the tone shifted towards social gathering as business concluded, and people lingered to enjoy rare community time before returning to relatively isolated farmsteads. While modern farmers' markets might seem similar, the medieval version represented a much more crucial institution. For many villagers, market day provided the only regular contact with the world beyond their immediate settlement. The conversations, arguments, jokes, stories, flirtations, and negotiations that filled the air created not just commerce but community, reinforcing social bonds through shared sound experiences. Number 5. The communal rhythms of harvest time. Few sounds generated more excitement than the collective swish and thud of harvest activity. Medieval communities lived perpetually on the edge of food insecurity, making successful harvests literally life-saving events. When fields ripened, every able-bodied person participated in bringing in crops before weather could damage them, creating a distinctive community soundscape. The rhythmic swishing of scythes cutting through grain created a bass note, accompanied by the shuffle of feet moving down rows, the thud of cut bundles being gathered, and the constant chatter of workers coordinating efforts. Harvesters developed work songs specifically designed to synchronize movements and maintain energy through long days of physical labor. These songs, often featuring call and response patterns, created practical rhythm while boosting morale. Children contributed high-pitched excitement as they participated in age-appropriate tasks, from carrying water to workers to gathering missed grain. Dogs barked while chasing field mice suddenly exposed by the cutting. Horses and oxen added their distinctive sounds as they pulled carts loaded with harvested crops. The overall effect was one of purposeful chaos, dozens or even hundreds of people and animals working collectively, creating a soundscape unique to this crucial annual activity. As harvested grain reached processing areas, new sounds emerged. The wooden flails used for thrashing created rhythmic thumping as workers separated grain from stalks. Winnowing produced its own whooshing sound as farmers tossed grain into the air so breeze could carry away chaff. Mills ran continuously during harvest season, adding their mechanical rumble to the overall harvest soundscape. Harvest sounds held deep emotional significance. Good harvests meant survival through winter, poor ones potentially meant starvation. The collective effort created social bonds, reinforcing the interdependent nature of medieval communities. As work concluded, the sounds shifted towards celebration music, dancing, laughter, and feasting replaced work rhythms as communities acknowledged their relief and gratitude through harvest festivals that often represented the year's most joyous gatherings. Number 4. The craftspeople's symphony. Medieval villages buzzed with the sounds of specialized craft production, creating neighborhood sound marks as distinctive as visual landmarks. Each craft generated its own sonic signature that informed villagers about economic activities without visual confirmation. These occupational sounds formed a working symphony that filled daylight hours. Weavers created rhythmic clacking as their looms moved back and forth, the tempo indicating both the weaver's skill and the type of cloth being produced. Fulling mills pounded newly woven cloth with large wooden hammers to clean and thicken it, creating distinctive thumping patterns. Dye works contributed splashing and stirring sounds, along with the calls of workers coordinating the precise timing needed for color development. Woodworkers added their distinctive contributions, the scrape of planes smoothing boards, the rhythmic chopping of axes shaping timber, the precision tap of carvers' mallets, and the high-pitched singing of saws cutting through wood. Furniture makers, wagon builders, coopers making barrels, and carpenters creating buildings all produced variations on these wooden notes. Leather workers brought their own sounds to the village symphony. The splashing of tanning vats where animal hides soaked in various solutions, the thudding of mallets pounding leather to soften it, and the distinctive squeaking noise of leather being worked and stretched all signaled the production of essential goods like shoes, belts, harnesses, and containers. Potters contributed another sound dimension with the distinctive squelching of clay being wedged and prepared, the whir of pottery wheels spinning, and the hollow tapping as potters tested dried vessels for proper sound before firing. Kilns added their roaring during firing days, with the community aware that this intense heat represented significant fuel investment and crucial household production. Medieval people learned to interpret these craft sounds from childhood, understanding that the rhythm of a loom or the cadence of a woodworker's plane communicated information about production stages, worker skill, and even product quality. Women spinning thread with drop spindles or wheels created a constant background hum in many households, their spinning whorl sound so omnipresent that its absence might be more notable than its presence. Number 3. The evening song culture. As daylight faded and work concluded, medieval villages transformed their soundscape from productive to recreational. The evening hours between work and sleep hosted rich audio traditions that built community through shared listening and participation. Without electronic entertainment, medieval people created their own evening soundscape through social gathering and performance. Instrumental music emerged as workers set aside tools. Simple pipes, drums, harps, fiddles, and hurdy-gurdies weren't reserved for professional musicians but belonged to everyday people who developed playing skills throughout their lives. These homemade instruments created distinctly local sounds, with regional styles evolving through generations of players learning from one another. Singing held even greater importance, requiring no equipment beyond the human voice. Work songs transitioned to recreational ballads, with performers sharing traditional tales through melody. These storytelling songs preserved community history, moral lessons, and entertainment simultaneously. Ballad singing often involved audience participation through choruses, creating communal experiences that reinforced shared values and memories. Storytelling without music filled many evening gatherings, with skilled narrators modulating their voices dramatically to maximize engagement. Tales might spread across multiple evenings, creating medieval serials that community members followed eagerly. Unlike reading, which is primarily solitary, these spoken stories were inherently social, with audience reactions shaping the telling through immediate feedback. Special occasions brought more elaborate evening sounds. Holiday celebrations, weddings, and community festivals might feature traveling performers with more exotic instruments or greater skill. Dancing added percussive footfalls and physical movement coordinated with music. Religious observances brought particular songs reserved for specific calendar dates, their familiar melodies evoking emotional connections to community traditions and spiritual meanings. The evening sound culture served crucial social functions beyond entertainment. These gatherings transmitted cultural knowledge between generations, reinforced community bonds, provided courtship opportunities for young people under community supervision, and created psychological transition between work and rest. The shared experience of listening together in an era without recorded sound made music and storytelling far more significant than we might recognize from our media-saturated perspective. Number 2. The night watchman's call. As medieval villages settled into darkness, one distinctive sound emerged while most others faded: the night watchman's call. This official position existed primarily for fire prevention, as thatched roofs and open flame lighting created constant danger. The watchman patrolled throughout night hours, calling out reassurance while remaining alert for trouble. The calls varied by region but typically included time announcements and brief safety reminders: 10 o'clock and all's well, watch your fires and candles. Some communities developed more elaborate verses, with watchmen singing rather than simply shouting. These calls served practical purposes. They reassured anxious villagers that someone remained vigilant, they reminded householders to bank fires before sleeping, and they provided time orientation in an era without clocks. The watchman typically carried a horn or whistle to sound alarm if trouble was spotted. These emergency signals cut through night silence with distinctive urgent patterns that immediately mobilized village response. Different numbers or patterns of blasts might communicate specific emergency types: fire requiring water brigades, intruders needing armed response, or medical emergencies requiring the midwife or healer. Beyond official announcements, the watchman's footsteps and lantern movements created subtle auditory and visual rhythms that attentive villagers could track. Regular patrol timing provided subconscious reassurance, while disruptions to the pattern might cause light sleepers to listen more intently for trouble. The watchman's role as night sentinel created both practical security and psychological comfort through predictable sound patterns. During significant community events like weddings or religious festivals, the night watchman might incorporate congratulations or blessings into his calls, personalizing the announcements to acknowledge special circumstances. During times of tension, such as war threats, suspicious strangers in the area, or following recent crimes, the calls might occur more frequently with modified wording to encourage heightened vigilance. Number 1. The sacred sounds of prayer and ritual. Throughout medieval village life, religious sounds provided both daily structure and spiritual meaning. These sacred audio elements weren't limited to church buildings but permeated everyday experience through public and private devotional practices that created distinctive sound marks within the community acoustic environment. Church services produced the most formal religious sounds. Mass celebrated in Latin created a mysterious soundscape for most villagers who understood little of the actual words but recognized the patterns and responded appropriately at designated moments. The elevated speaking voice of the priest, the congregational responses, and the rhythmic nature of the liturgy created audio experiences that transcended literal comprehension, operating instead through familiar patterns that conveyed sacred meaning. Religious processions brought sacred sounds outside church walls and into village streets. On significant feast days, community members walked prescribed routes carrying religious objects while singing hymns and reciting prayers. The sound of these processions approaching, passing, and receding created dynamic audio that transformed ordinary streets into sacred spaces through sound alone, with participants and observers experiencing different acoustic perspectives of the same event. Private devotion generated quieter but still significant religious sounds. Families praying together before meals or at bedtime, individuals reciting rosary prayers with rhythmic bead movement, and personal prayer disciplines created intimate soundscapes within households. These practices, performed daily or weekly depending on devoutness, established spiritual sound routines that children absorbed from earliest memory. Death brought particular religious sound practices that marked community transitions. Bell tolling announced deaths with patterns indicating gender and status. Mourning processions included professional wailers in some regions, creating dramatic sound expressions of grief. Funeral services and burial rituals incorporated specific songs and prayers believed to assist the deceased soul, with their performance considered spiritually significant rather than merely ceremonial. Religious sound extended beyond specifically Christian practices. Folk beliefs incorporated sound elements for protection and prosperity, specific phrases spoken while planting crops, songs sung during first harvest, verbal charms spoken over newborn children or sick family members, and traditional phrases uttered during everyday activities to ward off misfortune. These practices blended Christian and pre-Christian elements, creating layered sound traditions that reflected complex medieval spirituality. Ever heard someone say medieval villages were quiet compared to our modern world? Have you considered that while their sounds differed dramatically from ours, medieval communities actually created rich, meaningful soundscapes that modern ears might find overwhelmingly intense, particular, and alive?